In this video, we will cover the basics of making a recording in the Newcastle University Music Studios. You should have already watched the previous video on how to turn on the studio and set up a project in Pro Tools. In this video, we will be looking at the main screens of Pro Tools, creating a new track. We will look at the file structure used by Pro Tools when saving a project. I will show you how to plug in a microphone in the live room of the recording studio. We'll be looking at the preamps in the main recording studios and how to set the gain level of a microphone. Let's start with the main screens of Pro Tools. Pro Tools has two main windows, the Edit window, which you will have already seen, and the Mix window. These two windows can be switched between using Control and Equals on a PC or Command and Equals on a Mac. Both the Edit and the Mix window display the audio tracks present in the project. By default, the Edit window displays the tracks with audio or data contained on them in the main part of the window. The names of the tracks are on the left of the screen, along with the metering, which shows the strength of the signal being played through that track. There are various other options you can choose to show here. We will look at those in future sessions. The Edit window is laid out as a timeline. You can use a variety of different time bases along this timeline, including bars and beats, minutes and seconds, and time code, which is used when working with film. At the top of the window, we have a bar full of buttons. These are arranged in groups. From left to right, we have the Edit Mode selection, Zoom controls, Editing tools, the time counter, Grid options, Transport controls, MIDI options, and master level meters. You'll learn more about these in due course. For now, you'll mostly be using the transport controls, in particular, stop, play, and record. As Pro Tools plays, a marker will move over the timeline indicating the point which is being played back to you. This is known as the playhead. You can change the location that Pro Tools plays from by using the transport controls, fast forward or rewind, or by clicking along the grey timeline at the top of the window. If you click and drag this timeline, you will highlight an area of the track. You can right-click the play button to set the play button to loop around this area of the track. The same can be done to record over the same phrase repeatedly. You'll come to know the Mix window better in Semester 2. However, it contains the faders and pan controls for every track, as well as larger meters and insert and send slots for processing and routing audio around Pro Tools. Next, we'll look at the basic file structure Pro Tools uses when saving a project. When you create a Pro Tools session, you don't just create a single file. There are a group of files which Pro Tools needs in order to work. When creating a new project, Pro Tools will create a folder in the location you have saved the project in. Within this folder, Pro Tools saves the session file, which has the suffix .ptx, a wave cache file, and a folder full of all the audio you record in the session. It may also create folders for bounced files, clip groups, session file backups, and video files. This is important to know because you need to ensure you have all of these files when transferring your project from the computer you're working on to a USB stick, when sending the files to a friend, or when submitting your work. Always make sure you are transferring the folder containing all of these files when transferring your project. Additionally, it is wise to version your save files. Use Save As to create a new .ptx file in your save location and call it something logical. For example, My Project 1, My Project 2, My Project 3, or My Project 9th of December morning, My Project 9th of December afternoon, etc., etc. Next, let's look at how to plug a microphone into the live room in the music studios. The two main recording studios have two rooms: the control room, where the computer and speakers are located, and the live room, where instrumentalists play their music. Microphones are typically set up in the live room to record the musicians, with the recording engineer or producer controlling the session from the control room. Microphones produce electrical signals and need to be connected to the rest of the studio using an XLR cable. An XLR cable is a 3-pin balanced cable which prevents noise interfering with the signal. XLR cables have two ends, a plug, often called the male connector, and a socket, often known as the female connector. When dealing with audio, signal typically flows along the cable from the socket to the plug. Cables can be extended by connecting them together or can be connected directly to other equipment. We're going to plug our microphone into an XLR cable and then plug the XLR cable into the patch bay in the studio. A patch bay is a numbered bank of connectors which allow us to route the signals from our microphones to different locations. This patch bay connects to a similar patch bay in the control room using XLR connectors, and also has connectors to plug in headphones so the musicians in the live room can hear the track they're recording to. Our signal is now flowing from our microphone down the XLR cable, through the live room patch bay and into the control room patch bay. This is the first part of the signal flow. We can then choose which preamps we want to use. For the purposes of this video, we're going to use the main preamps, and so the patch bay should be patched 1-to-1 as shown here. This means that input channel 1 on the live room patch bay connects to channel 1 on the control room patch bay and channel 1 on the main microphone preamps. We'll talk about the preamps more in a moment. After being amplified, the signal flows into the external sound card, which is operated through Pro Tools running on the PC. Thinking about this signal flow will help you to troubleshoot issues you're having with your recording. You can use this flow as an order of things to check when you're not getting signal from one of your microphones. Start at the beginning of the signal path and check that the microphone is plugged in and turned on if it needs to be. You can also try swapping it out with a different microphone. Next, check the XLR cable and possibly try using a different input channel on the patch bay. A common issue is that someone has removed the patch cables in the control room. Ensure that these are patched correctly. Next, check the settings on the preamp and that Pro Tools is set up for recording correctly. Running these checks will solve 99% of studio issues. However, if you find that you're still having problems, you can contact any of the music technician team who will be happy to help you. Before we record, we need to create a new track in Pro Tools. An audio track in Pro Tools is the place where audio gets recorded to or gets played back from. Imagine an audio track as a container for a number of different channels or streams of audio. Mono tracks have one channel of audio, stereo tracks have two, and there are a variety of other channel counts which will allow you to record audio for various different uses, such as surround sound or ambisonics work. For the purposes of this module, you will only need to use mono or stereo audio tracks. You will need a channel for every microphone you intend to record in the studio. If you're using a stereo pair of microphones, you can create one stereo track, which has two channels. You can always move a stereo pair from two mono tracks to a stereo track, so it's not a problem if you record a stereo pair on two separate mono tracks. To create a new track, go to the track menu at the top of the screen and select New. You will be presented with the New Tracks window. Let's have a look at the options we have. The first box is the number of tracks of a certain type we want to create. Currently, we're going to create one track. Next is the channel count of the track. You'll see a variety of options in this list. Note that Pro Tools HD systems have access to a larger range of channel counts. The next box allows you to select the track type. We're mostly interested in audio tracks, but before we move on, I'll give you a brief rundown of the most important track types. First of all, we'll look at audio tracks. Audio tracks are used for recording and playing back audio. That could be sounds you've recorded in the studio, or on a portable recorder, or sounds you've found online. An aux input also operates on audio. However, this track type contains no audio data and cannot be recorded to, which is why it doesn't have a record arm button in the mix window. It allows you to process the audio in some way and immediately passes the audio to the output. The master fader is an important track which shows the summed audio from all other tracks and allows us to monitor the signal level going out of Pro Tools so that we can see that our main mix isn't clipping. It also allows us to process all of the audio from a mix at the same time, in a process known as mastering. A MIDI track records MIDI input data, for example from a controller keyboard, and passes it out to another program or external device. An instrument track also contains MIDI data. However, that data can then be used in conjunction with a software instrument plugin, which allows us to get a variety of sounds from our computer. This means that an instrument track brings MIDI data in and sends out channels of audio. People sometimes select this track because they are recording an instrument in the studio. Beware that you cannot record a microphone to this sort of track, and that you should use an audio track instead. At the top of the track type list, you will see two types of folder track. We will use these a lot more in Semester 2, along with aux tracks. However, all you need to know for now is that these tracks can contain other tracks to make your session neater and easier to move around. You might find it useful to put groups of instruments into a folder track. For example, all of your drums or all of your guitars. The next box along in the New Tracks window is the time base. All tracks can have their time base set to either sample-based or tick-based. Sample-based tracks have their clip locations based on the audio sample corresponding to their location. This means that their position on the timeline is absolute and fixed in time. Tick-based tracks have their location based on the bars and beats timescale. This means that the position of clips on these tracks may change based on changes made to the tempo or meter as you work on a session. By default, audio tracks are sample-based, and MIDI and instrument tracks are tick-based. Finally, you can name your track and press create. Alternately, use the plus button to set up another track before creating them all. You can rename tracks in the mix or edit window by double-clicking on the name. You can double-click the color tab next to the name to choose the color of that track. We now have an audio track set up and are ready to record our microphone from the studio onto it. Before we can record, we need to set the gain for the microphone on the preamp. The gain is simply the control we use to amplify the signal coming from the microphone. So that we can set the gain, we need to see the signal from the preamp displayed in Pro Tools. Each audio track has a record arm button. Press the record arm button on the track you are plugged into on Pro Tools. In the main recording studios, the inputs from each preamp channel can be selected on the input selection on Pro Tools. The main preamps in the studio are RME Octamic preamps. In the input selection list, they are labelled as Octamic preamps. Each preamp channel has a number after it, which refers to which channel on which preamp you are selecting. The first number refers to the preamp unit itself, from top to bottom. In Studio 1, this will be 1, 2, 3, or 4. The second number refers to the channel on that preamp. Each Octamic preamp has 8 channels, and so this will be 1 through 8. So, Octamic 1.1 refers to the top preamp and the first channel. Octamic 1.8 refers to the 8th channel of the same preamp. Octamic 2.4 refers to the 4th channel of the second preamp, etc., etc. If we don't amplify the signal from the microphone enough, we will get a very quiet recording. And because the signal we want to hear is low, it will be closer in volume level to any static or background noise induced by the system. This comparison between the signal we want to hear and the background noise is called the signal-to-noise ratio. Conversely, if we turn the gain up too high, the signal may be amplified beyond the limits of the system, causing the sound to audibly distort. This is known as clipping or overloading the preamp. Our preamps and Pro Tools will show a red light if this occurs. You should always aim to set your gain so that the signal from the microphone is nice and healthy. However, you should leave enough room for any louder dynamics to be recorded without clipping. This is known as allowing headroom. Get your instrumentalist to play the loudest passage from the piece of music that they're performing in order to check that the gain level is set correctly and that they won't overload the preamp. It's always worth giving them a little bit more headroom than they need when checking the level, just in case they get really into the performance. No part of your assignment audio should be clipping in any way. Now that you're familiar with the main control on our preamps, gain, let's take a look at the other buttons on the preamp and what they do. The first button is the plus 48 volt button, otherwise known as phantom power. This button provides 48 volt phantom power to whichever microphone is plugged into this channel. Phantom power is required to use condenser microphones. Always turn this off before plugging in a microphone and before unplugging it. You should turn Record Arm off in Pro Tools before using this button as well, because it will often cause a loud pop which could blow the speakers. Dynamic and ribbon microphones do not need phantom power. If switched on when using a dynamic microphone, it usually doesn't do any harm. But you must be very careful when working with ribbon microphones, as the phantom power can cause the ribbon in the microphone to burn like a filament in a light bulb. Only use phantom power on non-condenser microphones if their instructions tell you to do so. The low cut button, also known as a high-pass filter, removes the lower end of the frequency spectrum from the signal. Usually this is set to cut anything below 80 to 120 Hz. This is useful for cutting out low rumbles or foot tapping on higher instruments like vocals, strings, or woodwind. However, if used in conjunction with an instrument with a lot of low end, such as a kick drum or a bass guitar, it may seriously and permanently compromise the recorded sound. You can always apply a low cut in a mix, so if in doubt, don't engage this button. The bottom button on the preamp is known as phase. On some preamps you will see it labelled using this symbol. The phase button inverts the phase of the channel. In short, audio waveforms repeat in cycles. Phase describes the position of the wave in that cycle. This button is useful when recording an instrument with more than one microphone. Sometimes waves from sound sources will arrive at different microphones at different points in the cycle. This is known as phase difference. If the phase difference between the two waves is close to 180 degrees, the waves are known as out of phase. This results in a thinner and less pleasing sound when the waves are combined together. To solve this, we use this button to invert the phase on one of the signals. We will discuss phase in greater detail throughout the course, and we'll see its effects when looking at drum recording. Now that our gain is fully set, we're ready to record. We need to tell Pro Tools which tracks we want to record onto. To do this, press the record arm buttons on the tracks you want to record on. This is probably already highlighted if you've just set the gain on your preamp. Next, locate the transport bar at the top of the screen and press the record button. This tells Pro Tools we're about to record. Because Pro Tools works in a similar way to a tape machine, to start the recording, we need to press the play button. When Pro Tools is recording, you will see the playhead creates a red clip with the waveform of whatever you're recording within it. It will start where the playhead was located when the play button was pressed, and stop when you press stop or spacebar. Once you have finished your recording, you can play back your recording by moving the playhead to the start of the clip you just recorded and press play or spacebar. If you're following this video in the studio, well done! You just created your first recording. I hope you found this video on the basics of recording into Pro Tools useful.